Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This space is for anyone who has ever felt different, broken, overlooked, or tested by life, and still believes that there's something greater inside of them. Here we turn pain into purpose, uniqueness into power, and struggle into rebirth. I'm building this channel to inspire people, awaken something real in them, and create stories and messages that remind them who they are. So if this speaks to you, subscribe, share, and support the mission. Together we can build something that can truly help other people rise. All right, let me get into today's message, guys. So, I think one of the hardest things for people with big hearts is not loving others. It's letting themselves be loved. By letting themselves be helped, supported, chosen, cared for, and held without feeling uncomfortable, without feeling like a burden, without feeling like they owe something back just for being chosen. And that can be a very hard thing to admit, because some people know exactly how to pour. They know how to show up. They know how to be strong when everyone else is falling apart. They know how to carry weight, offer guidance, hold space, and give reassurance. Keep going and giving and keep being the other ones that people can lean on. But when is it their turn? When kindness turns towards them, when support is offered to them, when love arrives gently and asks nothing dramatic in return. Something in them hesitates. Something in them tightens. And I think that says a lot. Because sometimes the people who give the most are the very people who quietly learn that receiving is dangerous. Dangerous because it makes them feel exposed. Because it makes them bring up need. Because it asks them to stop performing strength for a moment and simply be human. And for some people, that feels harder than carrying everything alone. I think a lot of people were not taught how to receive in peace. They were taught how to earn, how to prove, how to perform, how to be useful, and how to become dependable. How to deserve care by first being everything for everyone else. So when something good comes without struggle, when support comes without manipulation, when love comes without confusion, when help is offered without making them feel small, they do not always know how to relax into it. Sometimes they question it. They pull away, they feel guilty inside, or they try to give it back immediately because simply receiving feels too vulnerable. They start minimizing their own needs because being cared for seems unfamiliar. And that is real. Because a lot of people, giving became identity. Being the strong one became identity. Being the helper became identity. Being the one who does not ask for much became identity. And when something becomes identity, it can feel threatening to step outside of it. Even when stepping outside of it actually is part of healing. Because then the question becomes, who am I if I'm not always the one holding it all together? Who am I if I let someone show up for me? Who am I if I stop proving my worth through what I carry? And who am I if I let myself need something? And that touches something deep. And I think more people need compassion around that. Because the inability to receive is not always arrogance. It's not always pride. It's not always emotional distance. Sometimes it's pain. Sometimes it comes from a place where support was inconsistent. Sometimes it comes from the places where vulnerability was what they were against. Sometimes it comes from times when you needed care and you did not get it and you stopped expecting it. Sometimes it comes from learning that the safest thing to do was to become self-sufficient and not ask for too much. So now, even when love is real, even when help is sincere, even when support is clean, something in you still feels like it has to stay on guard. Not because you want to, but because part of you does not know yet how to trust it. And that is where healing becomes very honest. Because healing is not only learning how to give from a good place, it's also learning how to receive without shrinking, apologizing, overcompensating, or turning yourself into a debt the moment someone offers you care. And that matters. Because receiving is not weakness. Receiving is not selfishness. It's not laziness, and it is not becoming less worthy because you are no longer the one doing all the carrying. Receiving is part of wholeness. It's part of relationship, part of trust, part of allowing life to meet you with something gentler than struggle. And I think some people have been in survival mode for so long that gentleness feels almost suspicious. They know how to live in effort. They know how to live in overfunctioning. They know how to live in responsibility, pressure, and constant self-management. But receiving asks something very different. It asks you to soften. It asks you to believe that you do not have to earn every good thing through exhaustion. It asks you to believe that being loved does not have to feel like a test. It asks you to believe that support can exist without a hidden cost. It asks you to believe that your need is not making you ask for much. That is profound. Because sometimes the real wound is not the only one that ever gave. Sometimes the real wound is that somewhere along the way you stop believing that it was safe to let anything in. And when that happens, even beautiful things can feel hard to hold. Compliments feel uncomfortable. Rest feels undeserved. Being helped feels embarrassing. Being cared for feels exposing. Being chosen feels almost easier to doubt than to accept. And yet this is where something sacred can shift. Because there comes a point where you begin to realize that always being the caregiver can become its own form of control. Not bad control, not malicious control, but still a kind of control. Because when you're always the one pouring, you stay in motion. You stay in strength. You stay in the role you know. You do not have to sit in uncertainty of being touched by care. But receiving asks you to release that grip. It asks you to let the moment be what it is. To let someone be kind without turning it into an obligation. To let yourself rest without immediately justifying it. And to let yourself be supported without feeling like your value has somehow decreased. It takes courage. More courage than people think. Because for some people, being held feels more vulnerable than caring. Being cared for feels more intimate than giving care. Being seen in need feels more exposing than showing up strong. And being loved without having to perform for it can stir up grief that they didn't even know they were carrying. Grief for all the times they needed that and were never received. Grief for all the years they thought worthiness had to be proven. Grief for all the ways they became so good at surviving that they forgot that they were allowed to be nurtured too. That grief is not a setback. It is part of the opening. Because sometimes before you can receive with peace, you have to face the pain that taught you that receiving was unsafe. You have to tell the truth. The truth that maybe you do struggle to let people in. Maybe you do feel guilty when someone helps you. Maybe you do feel the urge to repay every kindness immediately because simply accepting it feels too raw. Maybe some part of you still believes that love has to be earned through usefulness. And that honesty is powerful. Because once you see it, you can begin to loosen it. You can begin to let the new truth in. That you are allowed to be supported too. You are allowed to rest too. You are allowed to be held. That your humanity is not an inconvenience. And that your need is not a flaw. That receiving does not make you weak. It makes you reachable. And I think that word matters. Reachable. Because some people have become so strong, so capable, and so self-contained that no one really can get to them anymore. Not fully. They can serve, they can help, they can lead, they can inspire, but they cannot quite relax into being cared for. And that creates loneliness. Even in the middle of connection, in the middle of love. Because there's loneliness that comes from always being the one who gives and never fully letting yourself be met. And that kind of loneliness is quiet, but it's deep. And I think healing asks us to become more reachable than that. Not to everyone, but to what is real. Reachable to love that is sincere. Reachable to support that is clean. Reachable to care that does not ask us to become less of ourselves. And reachable to the possibility that life is not only asking us to pour out, but to receive what is meant to replenish us. And that is beautiful to me. Because when a person finally lets themselves receive without guilt, something softens in a very powerful way. Their nervous system softens, their relationships soften, their inner life softens. They stop living as though that every need must be hidden. They stop apologizing for taking up space. They stop rushing to compensate for every kindness. And they stop feeling ashamed for being human. And in that softness, something deeper becomes possible. Reciprocation. Real reciprocation. Not one person carrying everything. Not one person always rescuing. Not one person always overextending while secretly hoping someone notices that they need care too. But actual exchange, actual trust, and actual relationship. And that is healthy. That is holy. Because I do not think we were meant to only be fountains. I think we're also meant to be filled. To be filled by truth, love, support, and filled by moments where life reminds us that we do not have to prove our worth through every constant depletion. And that changes things. It changes the way you breathe. It changes the way you relate. It changes the way you see yourself. Because once you realize that you do not have to earn every gentle thing, you begin to live very differently. You stop worshiping struggle. You stop equating exhaustion with value. And you stop making yourself carry more just to feel deserving. Instead, you begin to understand that receiving well is also a form of maturity. To give with to receive with gratitude, to receive with openness, to receive without shame, to receive without immediately making yourself smaller because something kind was offered to you. And that is healing. And I think it is especially healing for the people who have spent most of their lives being the support system for everyone else. The ones who rarely ask for much. The ones who always know how to keep going. The ones who know how to pour into other people but secretly struggle to believe that anyone could pour into them with the same sincerity. To those people, I want to say this very clearly. You are allowed to be loved the way you love. You are allowed to care without guilt. You are allowed to receive without turning it into a debt. And you are allowed to be held without first proving how much you held for others. You are allowed. Not because you finally worked hard enough, not because you've earned it through pain, and not because you never needed anyone, but because you are human, because you matter, because your heart was never meant to only give it until it disappears. It also means to receive what restores it. So maybe the deeper work is not only learning how to love better, maybe it's learning how to let love in. How to stop feeling guilty for resting, how to stop apologizing for your needs, and how to stop treating support like something you have to earn through suffering first. You are also allowed to be comforted. You are also allowed to be helped. You are also allowed to be seen and supported without shame. And maybe real healing begins to deepen the moment you stop asking, how do I keep giving? And start asking yourself, can I let myself receive what my soul has needed to? And that is not weakness. That is wholeness. You do not have to feel guilty for receiving what brings you back to life. You are allowed to be poured into.